So we're starting off with something that sounds almost comical. During the British colonial period in India, specifically in the mid-1800s, certain British regiments ordered their soldiers to grow mustaches. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a direct military order. The British commanders believed that mustaches made soldiers look more masculine and intimidating to the local population. They thought a clean-shaven face made British soldiers appear too young and unworthy of respect. So if you were serving in certain cavalry and infantry units, you were literally required by military law to cultivate facial hair. Soldiers who couldn't grow proper mustaches were sometimes subject to disciplinary action or ridicule. Imagine getting court-martialed because your genetics didn't cooperate with military grooming standards. This order remained in effect for decades, and soldiers actually had to maintain specific mustache styles according to regulation. 39. During World War I, the German military came up with an ingenious but utterly bizarre reconnaissance idea. They strapped tiny cameras to pigeons, but here's where it gets really weird. Soldiers were ordered to train these pigeons to fly over enemy positions, while automatic cameras attached to their chests took photographs at timed intervals. The cameras were incredibly light and designed to click photos every few seconds during flight. Handlers had to spend months training pigeons to follow specific flight paths over enemy trenches. These soldiers literally had a job description that included pigeon photographer trainer. The captured images were often blurry and barely useful, but the military persisted with this program for quite some time. Imagine explaining to your family back home that your dangerous wartime duty was making sure pigeons wore their cameras properly. Some soldiers assigned to this detail probably thought they were being pranked when they first received these orders. This is one of the most bizarre weapons concepts in military history. During World War II, the United States military actually ordered scientists and soldiers to develop incendiary bombs carried by bats. Yes, you heard that right. Weaponized bats. The plan was called Project X-Ray, and it involved catching millions of Mexican free-tailed bats, attaching tiny incendiary devices to them, and releasing them over Japanese cities. The theory was that the bats would roost in the wooden structures common in Japanese architecture, and then the timed incendiaries would set fires across entire cities. Soldiers were ordered to construct special bat housing facilities, develop feeding schedules, and figure out how to keep millions of bats alive in captivity. During one test, some armed bats escaped and accidentally set fire to a U.S. military airfield in a general's car. The project was eventually canceled, but not before significant resources in military personnel were devoted to this absolutely insane concept. Some soldiers spent months of their service handling bats in caves. In 1932, the Australian military received one of the strangest combat orders in history: wage war against emus. Yes, large, flightless birds. After World War I, many Australian veterans had settled in Western Australia to farm wheat. Unfortunately, about 20,000 emus migrated to the area and started destroying crops. So what was the government's solution? What they did was to send in the military with machine guns. Soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery were ordered to treat this as a legitimate military operation, complete with official combat orders. They were given Lewis guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition with orders to eliminate the emu population. The operation was an absolute disaster. The emus proved to be remarkably difficult to kill. They could scatter quickly and were fast runners. After weeks of attempts and thousands of rounds fired, the military had only killed a fraction of the emu population. The soldiers were essentially ordered to conduct a military campaign against birds, and the birds won. Military officials had to officially report their failure in what became known as the Great Emu War, one of the most embarrassing military operations in modern history. During World War II, Allied forces came up with creative deception tactics, but one order stands out for its absurdity. British soldiers were commanded to build hundreds of fake tanks out of wood, canvas, and inflatable materials to deceive German aerial reconnaissance. What makes this particularly weird is the level of detail soldiers were ordered to maintain. They had to create fake tank tracks in the mud by dragging equipment around. They were ordered to park these dummy tanks in formations and even simulate tank crew activity around them. Some soldiers had the specific duty of moving these fake tanks to different positions each night to simulate a mobile armored division. The really bizarre part? They also created fake radio traffic, pretending to be tank commanders communicating with each other. Soldiers sat in empty fields having fake conversations over radio about imaginary tank movements, all while German intelligence listened in. They were literally ordered to put on an elaborate theatrical performance for the enemy with fake props and scripted dialogue, except the stage was a battlefield and the audience was trying to kill them. This one is particularly gross, but actually served a scientific purpose. During World War I, soldiers on various fronts were ordered to urinate into special collection containers. This wasn't hazing or punishment, it was a military order with a specific purpose. The nitrogen compounds in urine were needed to manufacture explosives, and some militaries were running low on traditional sources. So soldiers received official orders to contribute their urine to the war effort. Special collection stations were set up, and soldiers had to follow protocols for proper collection and storage. In some trenches, this became a regular daily duty. Imagine standing in a muddy, cold trench under constant threat of enemy fire, and your commanding officer issues you a direct order about your bathroom habits. Soldiers who had survived charges across no man's land found themselves following orders about bodily functions. It's one of those weird intersections of desperate wartime needs and awkward military commands that nobody talks about in history class. The U.S. Army's 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, also known as the Ghost Army, received some of the most theatrical orders in military history. These soldiers were specifically ordered to impersonate other military units to deceive the Germans during World War II. But here's the weird part. Some soldiers were ordered to blast recorded sounds of tank movements, troops marching, and construction from massive speakers mounted on trucks. They had to set up these sound systems near the front lines and play these recordings at full volume to trick German forces into thinking large military units were present. Soldiers had to operate this equipment while under potential fire, carefully controlling volume levels and timing to create realistic audio illusions. They were essentially military DJs running battlefield sound effects. The order specified exact sequences of sounds to play and at what times. They had scripts for their audio deception. Some of these soldiers were recruited from art schools and radio backgrounds, specifically for this bizarre duty. During the Russo-Japanese War and even into World War I, some traditional cavalry officers refused to accept modern warfare reality. Russian and other cavalry units sometimes received orders to charge machine gun positions with sabers drawn, essentially bringing medieval weapons to a modern gunfight. Officers who had trained their entire careers in traditional cavalry tactics ordered their men to charge directly at entrenched positions armed with automatic weapons, believing that speed and shock value would overcome firepower. These soldiers had to follow orders they probably knew were suicidal, charging on horseback with swords against Maxim guns that could fire 600 rounds per minute. The results were predictably catastrophic. Entire cavalry squadrons were mowed down within seconds, but the orders kept coming from commanders who couldn't adapt to modern warfare. Those soldiers found themselves in the bizarre position of being ordered to conduct medieval-style charges in the age of industrial warfare. It's a tragic example of how weird and deadly outdated military thinking could be when translated into actual battlefield orders. During World War II, British forces stationed in the Falkland Islands and other remote southern locations received an unusual non-combat order, penguin monitoring duty. Soldiers were assigned to watch penguin colonies and document their behavior, ostensibly to ensure they weren't being disturbed by military operations. But this was a real military assignment with regular duty rotations. They had to file reports about penguin activities, count populations, and ensure no military vehicles drove through nesting areas. These guys spent hours in freezing conditions observing seabirds as part of their official military duties. The absurdity wasn't lost on these servicemen. They'd enlisted to fight Nazis and instead found themselves watching penguins waddle around icy beaches. Orders specified they couldn't disturb the colonies, had to maintain certain distances, and needed to report any unusual penguin behavior. Imagine writing home to your family that your contribution to the war effort was penguin surveillance. It was a legitimate military order in official duty rosters, complete with scheduled watches and proper reporting protocols. Before radar was widely available, militaries used massive concrete acoustic mirrors and sound detectors to locate enemy aircraft. Soldiers received orders to operate these bizarre devices, which looked like giant concrete ears or satellite dishes. The weird part was the order itself. Soldiers had to sit in complete silence next to these structures, wearing special listening equipment trying to detect the faint sound of distant aircraft engines. Any noise from the operators could ruin the detection, so orders specified absolute silence. They essentially had a military order to sit perfectly still and quiet for hours. These acoustic locator operators had to distinguish between different aircraft types by sound alone and triangulate directions. The military issued detailed orders about head positioning, how to adjust the listening equipment, and protocols for reporting contacts. It was like being ordered to have superhuman hearing. Some soldiers spent entire shifts in freezing or sweltering weather, maintaining absolute silence, staring at massive concrete structures, listening for sounds that might not come. When radar arrived, these soldiers probably breathed a sigh of relief that their days of playing human microphones were over. This is one of the darkest and most bizarre orders on our list. The Soviet Union during World War II ordered soldiers to train dogs to run under German tanks while carrying explosives. The dogs were trained to associate the underside of tanks with food and would carry bombs on their backs meant to detonate when they crawled underneath enemy armor. Soldiers received orders to train these dogs using Soviet tanks, which created a massive problem. The dogs were trained on diesel-engine Soviet tanks, but German tanks used gasoline engines and smelled different. When deployed, many dogs either ran back to Soviet lines or refused to approach German tanks, or worse, ran under Soviet tanks instead. The soldiers assigned to this program had to train these animals knowing they were being prepared for suicide missions. The order specified training methods, feeding schedules, and deployment procedures for these anti-tank dogs. It's a grim example of desperate measures in desperate times, but it remains one of the most ethically questionable and bizarre military orders ever issued. Expanding on earlier deception tactics, Allied forces in World War II created entire fake armies using inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and even aircraft. Soldiers were ordered to deploy, maintain, and regularly move these inflatable military assets to deceive German reconnaissance. The bizarre nature of the order went beyond just setting up balloons. Soldiers had to follow detailed schedules for inflating and deflating equipment, moving pieces to simulate realistic military movements, and even repair punctures in these fake weapons. Imagine being under enemy observation and your urgent military duty is patching an inflatable tank with a bicycle repair kit. They were ordered to treat these props with the same care as real equipment, parking them in proper formations, camouflaging them appropriately, and creating the infrastructure you'd expect around real military hardware. Some soldiers had to create fake supply depots full of inflatable equipment. The orders were incredibly specific about positioning, timing, and maintenance of this elaborate rubber military force. It worked remarkably well, but it remains one of the strangest large-scale military operations ever commanded. During World War II, Allied forces dropped supplies to resistance fighters across occupied Europe. But here's the weird twist. Sometimes they were ordered to drop carrier pigeons via parachute. These weren't just any pigeons. They came with tiny parachutes, containers, and instructions. Soldiers had to carefully pack these birds into special containers with miniature parachute systems, ensuring the birds would survive the drop. The order specified exact packing procedures, what to feed the pigeons before the mission, and how to attach the parachutes. Royal Air Force crews received orders to treat these pigeon containers with extreme care during flight. On the ground, resistance fighters would find these parachuted pigeons, write messages about German positions, and release the birds to fly back to Britain with intelligence. The soldiers packing these birds had the surreal duty of preparing live animals for aerial insertion behind enemy lines. Can you imagine the briefing? Your mission today, Corporal, is to strap tiny parachutes onto 50 pigeons and make sure they survive being thrown out of an airplane over France. It sounds like something from a comedy sketch, but it was a real and surprisingly effective intelligence operation. In 1942, British military scientists proposed building an aircraft carrier out of picrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. The project was called Project Habakkuk, and soldiers and construction crews received orders to build prototypes of this ice ship. The orders were absolutely bizarre. Military personnel were commanded to construct massive refrigeration facilities, experiment with different ice and wood pulp mixtures, and build test structures in freezing conditions. Some servicemen spent months in Canadian lakes testing the structural integrity of ice formations meant to become warships. Lord Mountbatten was so enthusiastic about the project that he allegedly brought a block of picrete into a meeting with high-level officials and shot it with his pistol to demonstrate its durability. The soldiers working on this project had orders to maintain secrecy about the fact they were trying to build ships from reinforced ice. The project eventually proved impractical and was abandoned, but not before significant military resources were devoted to what sounds like something from a science fiction novel. Imagine being ordered to report to ice ship construction duty and realizing your commanders were completely serious. On D-Day, Allied forces executed Operation Titanic, which involved dropping hundreds of dummy paratroopers across Normandy to confuse German forces. But the soldiers who had to prepare and deploy these dummies received some truly bizarre orders. These weren't simple mannequins. They were sophisticated decoys designed to simulate real paratroopers. Soldiers were ordered to attach firecrackers and noise-making devices to create the sound of gunfire, making Germans think real combat was occurring. Some dummies had recorded sounds of battle that would play when they landed. The crews responsible for packing these dummies into aircraft had detailed orders about deployment timing, where to drop them, and how to prepare the sound effects. They had to treat these cloth and straw soldiers with the same operational security as real paratroopers. Imagine being in a bomber over occupied France, your hands full of dummy soldiers rigged with fireworks, throwing them out the door while actual paratroopers jumped nearby. The orders specified exact ratios of real to fake paratroopers in certain zones, making it a bizarre mix of real combat operation and theatrical performance. During various conflicts, militaries have attempted to use animals for mine detection, but one of the strangest involved cats. Soviet forces during World War II experimented with training cats to detect mines based on the theory that cats' sensitive paws would help them avoid stepping on buried explosives. Soldiers received orders to train cats, notoriously independent and untrainable animals, to walk through potential minefields and avoid mines. Anyone who has ever owned a cat can imagine how well this worked. The cats refused to cooperate, would wander off, ignore their handlers, or simply refuse to walk where directed. The soldiers assigned to this program must have felt they'd done something to anger their commanding officers. Orders specified training procedures, reward systems, and deployment protocols for these mine-detecting cats. In reality, the cats did whatever they wanted, and the program was quickly abandoned. But for a brief period, actual military personnel had official orders to conduct tactical operations with cats. The after-action reports on this program must have been entertaining reading for anyone not involved in the disaster. During World War II and later conflicts, soldiers received orders to create massive artificial smoke screens to hide military movements. The weird part was the scale and specific nature of these orders. Units were commanded to operate special smoke generators that burned fog oil to create dense smoke clouds that could cover entire army groups. Soldiers manning these generators had to maintain them constantly, often working in the thick, oily smoke they were producing. Orders specified exact timing for smoke generation, wind speed calculations, and proper spacing of generators to create effective screens. These troops essentially had orders to generate pollution on a massive scale as their primary military duty. The smoke was so thick that soldiers operating the generators often couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. They had to feel their way around the equipment, all while keeping it running according to strict orders. Some smokescreen operations lasted for days, with soldiers working in shifts to maintain continuous coverage. Imagine explaining that your war service involved standing in toxic smoke for hours, making sure the smoke machine kept smoking. It was critical work, but definitely one of the stranger military specialties. British special operations during World War II came up with some creative sabotage ideas, but few were as bizarre as Operation Rat Bomb. Soldiers and operatives were ordered to obtain dead rats, hollow them out, fill them with explosives, and place them in German facilities. The theory was that when Germans found these dead rats, they would throw them into furnaces or boilers, causing explosions. Operatives received detailed orders on rat preparation, explosive placement, and deployment methods. They literally had instruction manuals for weaponizing deceased rodents. The strange part is that the operation was largely unsuccessful. The Germans discovered the rat bombs early on and began inspecting all dead rats carefully. However, the paranoia this created was arguably more effective than actual explosions. German soldiers and workers spent time carefully examining every dead rodent they found, disrupting operations. So British personnel had orders to stuff rats with explosives, knowing the psychological effect might be greater than the physical damage. It's one of those plans that sounds insane, but had its own strange logic. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet militaries ordered research into supposed anti-gravity technologies. While most of this was based on dubious science, real soldiers and scientists received official orders to investigate these concepts and produced actual reports. Military personnel were assigned to projects with code names and official budgets, tasked with researching whether they could make objects or vehicles defy gravity. They had orders to file regular progress reports, conduct experiments, and evaluate various theoretical approaches to anti-gravity propulsion. These weren't fringe operations. They had official military backing, funding, and personnel assignments. Scientists and soldiers worked on these projects seriously, even though the fundamental physics were questionable at best. Orders included testing various devices, analyzing reports from other researchers, and maintaining strict secrecy about the programs. It's a reminder that during the Cold War paranoia, military commanders were willing to order research into almost anything that might give them an advantage, no matter how scientifically implausible. Well into the 20th century, some militaries still maintained camel cavalry units and occasionally ordered them into combat in ways that seemed anachronistic. During various Middle Eastern campaigns, British and other forces had camel-mounted troops who received orders to charge machine gun positions or conduct traditional cavalry operations. These soldiers had to train extensively on camelback, learning to fire weapons while mounted on animals known for being temperamental and difficult. Orders specified formations for camel cavalry charges, procedures for caring for the camels, and tactical doctrines for camel-mounted warfare at a time when tanks were becoming common. The absurdity was compounded by detailed military regulations about camel management. Soldiers had official orders about feeding schedules, watering procedures, and even how to handle a camel that refused to cooperate during combat. There were disciplinary procedures for soldiers whose camels broke formation. Just picture being in a modern military briefing room for a moment, looking at maps and battle plans, and your commanding officer issues orders for a camel cavalry charge. The mix of ancient and modern warfare tactics created some truly bizarre military orders. During the Cold War, the U.S. military's Stargate project ordered soldiers and specially recruited individuals to attempt remote viewing, supposedly using psychic powers to spy on enemy installations. This was a real government-funded program with actual military personnel receiving orders to conduct psychic espionage. Soldiers and intelligence personnel were ordered to sit in rooms, enter meditative states, and attempt to psychically view distant locations, then file reports on what they saw. Orders specified procedures for these remote viewing sessions, including preparation rituals, documentation requirements, and evaluation criteria for the visions. Military personnel had to file serious after-action reports about their psychic spy missions, describing enemy facilities they supposedly viewed through extrasensory perception. Officers had to evaluate these reports and determine their credibility. The program ran for years with official military funding and personnel assignments. Whether you believe in psychic powers or not, the fact remains that actual soldiers received actual orders to conduct espionage using telepathy. It's one of the strangest officially sanctioned military programs in modern history, complete with manuals, protocols, and regular operational orders. During World War II, German forces dropped small anti-personnel mines called butterfly bombs because of their wing-like stabilizers. These weapons were designed to be difficult to disarm, but British explosive ordnance disposal soldiers received orders to clear them, often with their bare hands. The bombs were specifically engineered with anti-tampering devices, meaning almost any attempt to move or disarm them could cause detonation. Yet soldiers received orders to clear fields, streets, and buildings full of these devices. The orders acknowledged the extreme danger, but still required soldiers to render the bombs safe. EOD personnel had to develop techniques for dealing with these weapons, but every single bomb disposal was essentially a death-defying act. Orders specified that certain areas had to be cleared within specific time frames, meaning soldiers couldn't always wait for better equipment or methods. They literally received orders to approach and disarm devices specifically designed to kill anyone who touched them. Many EOD personnel died following these orders, carefully attempting to disarm bombs engineered to be undisarmable. It's a testament to their bravery that they followed such orders despite knowing the odds. During World War I, when communication was desperately difficult in trenches, some units experimented with using slugs and snails as message carriers for very short distances within trench systems. While pigeons were used for longer distances, soldiers received bizarre orders to test whether mollusks could carry messages between nearby trenches. The orders involved training these incredibly slow-moving creatures to travel between 2 points, attaching tiny message containers to them and timing their delivery speed. Soldiers had to care for these slugs, create appropriate paths for them, and attempt to direct their movement, as you might imagine. This was spectacularly unsuccessful. Slugs moved at a glacial pace, often went in wrong directions, and were easily killed by weather or combat conditions. But actual military personnel received actual orders to conduct field tests of tactical slug messengers. British engineer Barnes Wallis developed the famous bouncing bomb used in the Dam Busters raid, but the training orders for pilots who would deliver these weapons were extraordinary. Pilots received orders to fly extremely low over water, we're talking about 60 feet altitude, at specific speeds while maintaining precise positioning. This wasn't just difficult, it was incredibly dangerous. Pilots had to train to drop these spinning bombs at exact distances from targets, at exact altitudes, and at exact speeds, or the mission would fail. Orders specified that pilots practice these runs repeatedly, despite the extreme danger of low-altitude flying over water. The training was so dangerous that several aircraft crashed during practice runs, killing crew members before the actual raid even took place. Yet pilots continued receiving orders to conduct these training flights because the mission requirements were so specific. They had to master the technique of skipping a bomb across water like a stone while flying a heavy bomber at high speed just feet above the surface. The orders acknowledged the danger but required the training nonetheless. These pilots were essentially ordered to repeatedly perform one of the most difficult aviation maneuvers ever conceived. Italian naval forces during World War II developed manned torpedoes called
maiale,
this is Italian for pig. Frogmen received orders to ride these torpedoes into enemy harbors, attach explosive charges to ships, and escape before detonation. The weird part isn't the mission concept, it's the specific orders these divers received. They had to ride essentially a motorized bomb through enemy waters, wearing early diving equipment that often malfunctioned, in freezing water at night, navigating by crude instruments. Orders specified exact approach routes, procedures for attaching charges, and escape protocols. But the reality was that these men were riding torpedoes into defended harbors with limited life support and almost no protection. The orders treated this as a routine military operation with detailed procedures for mounting the torpedo, controlling it underwater, and dismounting to attach charges. These weren't orders for a desperate last stand. They were standard operational procedures for a regular military unit. The soldiers received these orders knowing they had a significant chance of drowning, being captured, or being killed in the explosion. The Italian military essentially ordered men to become human-guided missiles before the concept existed in modern warfare. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military conducted Operation Popeye, which involved cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season and disrupt enemy supply lines. Soldiers and air crews received orders to fly weather modification missions, dispersing chemicals into clouds to increase rainfall. This wasn't theoretical, it was an active military operation with flight schedules, chemical loading procedures, and target areas. Pilots received orders to seed clouds over specific regions to create mudslides and flooding that would block the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was an attempt to weaponize weather itself. The orders treated weather modification as just another military mission with briefings, target coordinates, and bomb damage assessments, except instead of dropping bombs, they were dropping silver iodide to make it rain. The crews had to follow precise procedures for dispersal altitude, chemical quantities, and cloud selection. It's one thing to seed clouds for agriculture. It's another to receive military orders to cause flooding and mudslides as a combat operation. The program remained secret for years, and when revealed, it led to international treaties banning weather warfare. But for several years, actual military personnel had orders to modify weather as a combat tactic. Before sonar was well developed, some naval forces experimented with using trained listeners to detect submarines by sound. But while one of the strangest variations involved ordering sailors to study and mimic the echolocation abilities of bats and dolphins to improve underwater detection. Naval personnel received orders to undergo unusual acoustic training, attempting to develop enhanced hearing abilities through various techniques inspired by biological sonar. They had to spend hours in special chambers practicing listening techniques and attempting to identify different underwater sounds. The orders specified exact training regimens, listening exercises, and testing protocols for these sailors. Some were ordered to spend time studying actual bats in caves to understand their acoustic abilities better. While the scientific basis was questionable, real military personnel received real orders to develop bat-like hearing capabilities for submarine detection. It sounds like something from a superhero origin story, but it was an actual military training program with official orders, scheduled training sessions, and performance evaluations. The sailors involved probably felt like they were part of an extremely weird science experiment, because they were. During World War II, soldiers in the Pacific Theater discovered they could create crude radio receivers using scavenged materials, razor blades, pencil leads, wire, and earphones from destroyed equipment. What's weird is that some commanders actually issued orders for soldiers to construct these foxhole radios as official equipment when regular radios were unavailable. The soldiers were given specific instructions on how to build these devices, what materials to scavenge, and how to set them up for receiving broadcasts. Engineering officers issued technical orders for constructing radios from trash, complete with diagrams and specifications. It was military-sanctioned MacGyvering on a massive scale. The orders acknowledged that these radios could only receive signals, not transmit, and reception was terrible, but soldiers were still commanded to build and maintain them. Some units had official positions assigned to maintaining these improvised radios. Imagine being in combat and receiving an official military order to make a radio out of a razor blade and some wire you found in the jungle. It worked surprisingly often, but it remains one of the most unusual official equipment orders ever issued, essentially commanding soldiers to manufacture their own equipment from scrap. During World War II, British forces defending harbors had a unique problem. SEALs would trigger underwater detection systems and anti-submarine nets. Rather than finding a way to distinguish SEALs from submarines, the Royal Navy issued orders to eliminate SEALs near naval facilities. Sailors received orders to locate and remove SEALs from harbor areas using various methods, including depth charges in some cases, essentially bombing SEALs because they were interfering with submarine detection. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was an ongoing order in certain naval installations. The absurdity of using military ordnance designed for submarine warfare against marine mammals wasn't lost on the sailors involved. They had official procedures for SEAL removal operations, reporting requirements for SEAL sightings, and protocols for clearing areas of these animals. Some sailors found themselves on regular SEAL patrol, which sounds like it should be a nature conservation job, but was actually a military duty involving explosive devices. The orders were serious and treated SEAL removal as a legitimate security operation. It's a strange example of wildlife creating legitimate military problems and receiving equally strange military solutions. During World War I, British soldiers on the Western Front received unusual medical orders related to trench foot and other ailments. Some medical officers, believing in various folk remedies, ordered soldiers to consume garlic regularly as a preventive measure against disease and infection. This wasn't a suggestion. In some units, it was an actual order with enforcement. Soldiers had to eat specific amounts of garlic at scheduled times, and officers would check compliance. Imagine being in a cramped trench with limited ventilation, and your entire unit has been ordered to eat raw garlic daily. The medical reasoning was dubious at best, but the orders were official. Supply requisitions included massive amounts of garlic, and distribution was treated like ammunition or rations. Soldiers who refused could face discipline for disobeying medical orders. The smell in some trenches must have been absolutely overwhelming. While garlic does have some antimicrobial properties, the way these orders were implemented with military precision and enforcement turned a questionable medical intervention into one of the stranger mandatory health orders in military history. Years later, the soldiers would recall these garlic orders as among the most unpleasant aspects of trench life. The French military hired cubist painters and artists and gave them military ranks specifically to design camouflage during World War I. Soldiers then received orders to implement these artistic designs, which sometimes involved painting military equipment in wild, abstract patterns that looked more like modern art than practical camouflage. These weren't subtle olive greens. Artists ordered soldiers to paint vehicles and artillery in bold geometric patterns, unusual color combinations, and designs that seemed completely impractical. The soldiers had to follow precise artistic specifications, matching colors and patterns exactly as the artists demanded. The weird part was the clash between military and artistic thinking. Soldiers trained in practical warfare received orders from artists who had never seen combat, resulting in some truly bizarre camouflage schemes. Some designs were actually effective by breaking up visual outlines, but others were purely artistic experiments that happened to have military applications. They found themselves taking orders from painters about military equipment, following color charts and artistic principles rather than tactical doctrine. It was one of the few times in military history where art school graduates outranked combat veterans on specific decisions. During World War I, British officers ordered infantry to attack enemy trenches following a very specific signal, an officer blowing a whistle. But the weird and tragic part was that this order remained in effect even after it became clear that German machine gunners were listening for these whistles. Soldiers received orders to go over the top. The moment they heard their officers whistle, but German troops learned to aim at the source of the whistle sound. Officers were essentially ordered to announce their location and the exact moment of attack to the enemy. Yet the order continued because it was considered essential for coordinating attacks in the noise and chaos of battle. Thousands of young lieutenants died following or giving this order, standing up, blowing their whistles, and being immediately shot by enemy machine gunners who were waiting for that exact signal. The order was so rigid that even when officers knew it was suicidal, they had to follow it. Some tried to find creative alternatives, but official doctrine required the whistle signal. It's a tragic example of military bureaucracy maintaining an order that was killing its own officers simply because changing official procedures was slower than recognizing the order's fatal flaw. During the Korean War, some by-the-book officers issued orders for full dress uniform and equipment inspections in forward combat areas, sometimes while their units were under fire or in active combat zones. Soldiers received orders to present their boots, brass, and uniforms for inspection according to peacetime standards while literally in war zones. These orders required soldiers to maintain parade ground standards of appearance and equipment care under battlefield conditions. Some units were ordered to conduct formal inspections, complete with white glove checks, while enemy forces were nearby or while artillery was falling in the area. The absurdity created resentment and sometimes endangered soldiers who had to divert attention from combat readiness to polish boots and shine brass. Officers issuing these orders seemed disconnected from combat reality, enforcing garrison standards in combat conditions. Soldiers found themselves being disciplined for dirty uniforms while sleeping in muddy foxholes. Veterans of these units recall the surreal experience of standing in formation for inspection, maintaining perfect posture and uniform presentation, while hearing the sounds of nearby combat. It exemplified the disconnect that could occur between military bureaucracy and battlefield reality. During World War II, before mine-clearing equipment was widely available, some units received truly horrific orders to clear suspected minefields. The most extreme version involved ordering soldiers to walk in line across fields to trigger mines with their own bodies, with the grim logic that losing some men to trigger mines was preferable to losing armored vehicles. While this sounds almost too dark to be true, there are documented cases of such orders being given, particularly on the Eastern Front and in some Pacific theater operations. Soldiers were literally ordered to walk across minefields to find mines by stepping on them. Some units refused these orders, understanding they were death sentences. The orders were sometimes phrased as mine detection or route clearance, but the reality was that soldiers were being used as human mine detectors with their own bodies as the detection equipment. When proper mine-clearing equipment finally arrived, it must have seemed like a miracle to soldiers who had previously been ordered to perform this task. It represents one of the darkest examples of military orders that showed complete disregard for soldiers' lives, treating human beings as disposable mine-clearing tools. Many who received such orders found ways to refuse or circumvent them, risking court-martial rather than certain death. During World War II, British military medical officers became concerned about vitamin D deficiency among troops in Northern Europe. In response, some units received official orders requiring soldiers to sunbathe for specific durations each day when weather permitted, regardless of tactical situation. These weren't suggestions for leisure time. They were medical orders with scheduled sunbathing periods. Soldiers had to disrobe in designated areas and expose their skin to sunlight for prescribed amounts of time, with officers checking compliance. In combat zones, this created bizarre situations where soldiers were ordered to strip down and sunbathe near the front lines. The orders specified minimum exposure times, acceptable weather conditions, and proper sunbathing positions to maximize vitamin D production. Medical officers took this seriously, incorporating mandatory sunbathing into daily duty rosters. Imagine being in a war zone, hearing artillery in the distance, and your commanding officer orders you to take off your shirt and lie in the sun for 30 minutes. While vitamin D is important for health, the rigid military implementation of sunbathing as an ordered activity, complete with enforcement and scheduling, made it one of the stranger medical orders in military history. During World War I, Some commanders issued orders that soldiers under artillery bombardment must remain completely silent, no screaming, shouting, or verbal reactions to explosions. The reasoning was that hearing their comrades scream would damage morale more than the bombardment itself. Officers enforced these orders strictly, sometimes threatening punishment for soldiers who cried out during bombardments. Men had to endure hours of shelling in complete silence, suppressing natural reactions to extreme terror and physical danger. Some orders specified that soldiers could be disciplined for any vocal reaction, even when wounded. The psychological toll of forcing men to suffer in silence, unable to express fear or pain, was immense. Soldiers described it as one of the most unnatural and difficult orders to follow. Being bombarded while forcing yourself to remain silent felt like denying your own humanity. Officers would patrol trenches during bombardments, ensuring compliance with the silence order. While the intention was to maintain morale, the order may have actually increased psychological stress by preventing natural emotional release. It created an eerie, surreal atmosphere where shells exploded and men died without anyone making a sound, like a silent film of apocalypse. Before certain high casualty operations in various wars, soldiers received orders to write letters to their families to be delivered in case of their death. While this practice was sometimes voluntary, in some units it was an official order. Soldiers were required to compose these final letters as part of pre-mission procedures. Officers would collect these letters, file them, and soldiers knew their words might be the last their loved ones would hear from them. The order to write your own posthumous letter forced soldiers to confront their mortality officially and bureaucratically before even entering combat. Some operations had such expected casualty rates that this order was standard procedure. Imagine sitting in a transport ship or aircraft, and your commanding officer orders everyone to write their death letters right now before the mission begins. It was acknowledging that the upcoming operation was likely to kill many of the men being ordered to participate. While the intent was practical, ensuring families received final words, the psychological impact of being officially ordered to prepare for your own death was devastating. Veterans recalled these orders as among the most emotionally difficult they ever received, turning the abstract possibility of death into an immediate administrative task. Before the Allied invasion of France in 1944, American soldiers received unusual orders designed to help them win hearts and minds of French civilians. Some units were ordered to attend mandatory dance classes to learn French social dancing, including the waltz and other ballroom dances popular in France. Combat soldiers trained for invasion found themselves under orders to attend dance instruction, learn proper ballroom technique, and practice with each other since no female partners were available. The orders specified that these skills were essential for building positive relationships with French civilians after liberation. Picture hardened combat veterans, men who had trained to kill, being ordered into formation to learn the waltz. Officers took this seriously. Soldiers could be disciplined for not taking dance training seriously or for missing dance instruction sessions. While the intention was good, helping soldiers interact positively with French society, the implementation was bizarre. After dance training, these same soldiers would return to weapons training and combat preparation. It was a surreal juxtaposition that many veterans remembered with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. "We danced in the morning and practiced bayonet charges in the afternoon," was how one soldier described it. During the Vietnam War, some units conducting operations in populated areas received specific orders about how to interact with civilians, including orders to smile and wave at all times when civilians were visible, regardless of the tactical situation. This was part of Hearts and Minds operations, but it created bizarre scenarios. Soldiers on patrol in potentially hostile territory received orders to maintain friendly expressions and wave at civilians, even when taking fire or in dangerous situations. The officers would remind troops before missions that smiling and waving were required behaviors, not optional. Some commanders took this so seriously that soldiers could be disciplined for failing to maintain a friendly demeanor in civilian areas. The disconnect between combat reality and these orders created severe psychological stress. Soldiers described the surreal experience of smiling and waving while being shot at, or maintaining a cheerful expression while terrified. The order assumed a level of emotional control and acting ability that turned combat soldiers into unwilling performers. While building civilian rapport was strategically important, ordering combat troops to maintain specific facial expressions and gestures during active operations showed how disconnected some strategic thinking was from battlefield reality. Many soldiers found these orders impossible to follow genuinely, resulting in forced, obviously fake smiles that probably didn't help the intended mission anyway. The number one spot goes to one of the most tragically absurd orders in military history: World War I cavalry and infantry units being ordered to conduct bayonet charges against entrenched artillery and machine gun positions. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was repeated throughout the war as standard doctrine by various armies. Soldiers received detailed orders for these charges: formation spacing, advance speed, when to affix bayonets, and how to cross no man's land. Officers knew from previous attempts that such charges resulted in catastrophic casualties, yet the orders continued coming. The military doctrine hadn't adapted to modern weapons, so commanders kept ordering tactics from previous centuries against 20th century firepower. Men were ordered to run across open ground in neat lines, carrying bolt-action rifles with knives attached against positions with automatic weapons capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. The orders acknowledged that casualties would be heavy, but insisted that moral courage and cold steel would overcome modern weapons. They didn't. Entire battalions were destroyed following these orders, sometimes gaining no ground whatsoever. Yet the orders continued because changing official military doctrine was harder than sending more men to their deaths. It represents the ultimate disconnect between military bureaucracy and battlefield reality. Orders that everyone knew were suicide, given repeatedly, followed by soldiers who had no choice, resulting in deaths that achieved nothing. It's the most insane recurring military order in modern warfare, made worse by the fact that it happened over and over, with commanders learning nothing from each catastrophe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military absurdity, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating history content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.